Respiratory system. In this lesson, we're going to be covering respiration rate, the respiratory and circulatory systems and how they're connected, respiratory system structures, gas exchange, the respiratory system in other animals, and the diseases of the respiratory system. The respiratory system. You breathe in and out 15 times per minute. With physical activity, breathing increases. Why do you think that is? On average, the lungs move 10,000 liters of air in and out of the lungs every day. It is responsible for adding oxygen to the cells and removing carbon dioxide from the body. And also, it works in conjunction with the circulatory system. It's a pretty amazing system that does a lot of things to keep you alive. The respiratory and circulatory systems. So although the lungs aren't part of the circulatory system itself, they work with it. Deoxygenated blood is sent from the heart through the blood vessels to the lungs. And you can see the lungs located right here, and you can see the carbon dioxide right there being exhaled from the body. So blood comes to the lungs, it drops off carbon dioxide, and it's going to pick up the oxygen. The lungs provide oxygen to the blood, which is then sent back to the heart. And we can see that right here, being sent to the left side of the heart, to the left atrium, and then to the left ventricle, and then out through the body. The respiratory system is made up of the nose, or the nasal cavity, which we find right there, the mouth, which is obviously right there, the pharynx and the larynx, which we located right here and here, the trachea, which is this tube right there, before it branches, the bronchi, which is the trachea after it branches, so right there, the lungs, which we have that structure, and then within the lungs, we're going to have our branching off of our bronchi into these bronchioles, which we see here, and then eventually we end up in the alveoli, which we see a blown up picture of right there. The respiratory system. So how does the respiratory system actually function? First up, air is going to enter through the nose and the mouth. So right here, air is going to go in. It's going to pass through the pharynx, which is this area right there, down the trachea, right here, into the bronchi, into the bronchioles, and then it's eventually going to end up in the alveoli, which we see blown up right there. So let's break down each of these major structures. So first up, the trachea. The trachea, otherwise known as the windpipe, is supported by rings of cartilage. This is connective tissue, and it gives it a rigid feel, and you can actually feel this. So if you rub your neck up and down, you can feel these ridges in your neck, and that is actually the trachea, the cartilaginous rings of the trachea. Now the trachea eventually branches off into our two bronchi, which we see here and here. Gas exchange. So the main purpose of the respiratory system is gas exchange, and those gases are oxygen and carbon dioxide. So each bronchi that we just mentioned in the previous slide is going to branch until it ends in tiny air sacs called alveoli, which we see right here. Right? That's an alveoli, that's one, and so on. And that's where the gas exchange actually occurs. And at the lungs, oxygen is going to enter the bloodstream and carbon dioxide is going to be exhaled from the body. So you can see the alveoli is wrapped in these blood vessels. So the deoxygenated blood is going to be these blue vessels, and it's going to bring with it carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide is going to be sent from the blood vessels into these alveoli, and then from there it's going to be exhaled out the lungs. Oxygen, on the other hand, is going to be brought in when we inhale. It's going to end up in these air sacs, and then it's going to make their way into the bloodstream to be carried back to the heart to be pumped out to the rest of the body. Now, how does this actually occur? Well, each alveolus has a very thin wall, and they're surrounded by capillaries, as we saw in the previous slide. Right? All these little blood vessels we see in this bottom picture here, those are going to represent our blood vessels. And we can see that here as well, especially in this diagram where you can see the very nice representation of the blood vessels there. And then the hand-drawn one on the right-hand side, this is going to be our blood vessel there, and the blue is going to be our alveolus. So in the alveoli, O2 enters the bloodstream and carbon dioxide leaves. And as you can see here, we have oxygen coming in, so we're going to breathe in our oxygen. It's going to enter the alveolus. It's then going to diffuse into the bloodstream and then be carried around the body. The carbon dioxide is going to diffuse from the bloodstream into the alveolus and then exhaled as we breathe out. Breathing. It's something that we take for granted because we do it all the time. But it's a little bit more complicated than just what we think it might be. So the breathing is the process of moving air, inhalation, and out, exhalation. And the more complicated part is that it involves numerous muscles in order for this to happen. The biggest muscle that actually makes breathing possible is the diaphragm, which is a large muscle below the lungs. There are other muscles inside the ribcage which allow the ribcage to expand, allowing more space for the lungs, allowing air to come in. Now when those muscles contract again, or when the diaphragm relaxes and it goes back up, it creates less space in the lung area, forcing air out. And funny enough, breathing is actually controlled by the amount of carbon dioxide in your blood, not your body's need for oxygen. And you can test this out. If you hold your breath and then exhale, you'll actually be able to hold your breath a little bit longer. You'll feel better. That pain will go away when you exhale because that's the carbon dioxide being removed from the body. Now, you still need to breathe. It's not just carbon dioxide, but the first driver of breathing is actually the amount of carbon dioxide in your blood, not the amount of oxygen. Other animals. The goal of any animal's respiratory system is to make oxygen available and to rid the body of carbon dioxide. Now, different animals use different structures. So, for instance, a fish use gills. You can see this on the shark right there. There's our gills for our gas exchange to occur. Now, inside the gills are capillaries, which remove oxygen from the water and then send the carbon dioxide back into the water. And this is why some fish need to be continually swimming to survive. They need that water continually passing over the gills for this gas exchange to occur. Diseases. Tuberculosis, otherwise known as TB, is an infectious disease easily passed between people. It's caused by bacteria entering your lungs, and its symptoms include things like fever, cough, weight loss, tiredness, and chest pain. And if not treated, it can actually be fatal. It's diagnosed with an X-ray, as we can see here in this bottom right picture. The top right picture is actually going to depict the actual bacteria itself using a scanning electron microscope. Asthma. Asthma is one of those diseases that so many people suffer from, but most people know very little about. Now, what it is a severe allergic reaction characterized by the constriction of the bronchioles. Remember, we talked about the trachea coming down, it branches into the bronchi, and then the bronchi branches eventually into the bronchioles, which lead into our air sacs. So it's these guys right here, the bronchioles, that are the site of the asthmatic attacks. What happens when they get constricted, as we see in this picture right here? So if they get filled up and there's less room for the gas to travel within the tubes, then there's less air available to the alveoli. Less air to the alveoli means less gas exchange, means you're going to be starved of oxygen, and you're going to get a buildup of carbon dioxide. Now, how do we relieve the symptoms of an asthmatic attack? Well, they're relieved using an inhaler. The inhaler is going to act to dilate the bronchioles, causing them to get wider, allowing air to pass back and forth again. Emphysema. Emphysema is a condition in which the alveoli walls deteriorate, causing the lungs to lose their gas exchange ability. So we've talked over and over again about the alveoli and how important they are for moving oxygen and carbon dioxide into and out of the blood. Now, if our capillary walls deteriorate from things like smoking or other respiratory diseases, that can cause these alveoli to lose their ability to exchange gas, again, starving your body of oxygen and creating too much carbon dioxide in your blood. And one of the greatest causes of emphysema is smoking. Pneumonia. Pneumonia is a condition in which the alveoli become filled with fluid, preventing the exchange of gases. So we're coming back to the alveoli again and again and again. Since the alveoli are the place of gas exchange, if we fill them with water, there'll be less oxygen available to the blood cells that are passing by the alveoli. So they won't be able to pick up nearly as much oxygen, they won't be able to rid the body of as much carbon dioxide, and again, we're going to be starved of oxygen, and we're going to have an abundance of carbon dioxide. Now, pneumonia may be caused by viral infections, bacterial infections, or fungi, and less frequently by other causes. The most common bacterial type that causes pneumonia is Streptococcus pneumonia. Symptoms of pneumonia. You're going to get things like headaches, low blood pressure, high heart rate, nausea, vomiting, pain with the joints, fatigue, high fever, chills. I remember when my son had it, he was about 2, and he was so lethargic, he was just literally slept for about 2 days straight, just waking up to have a little bit of food, and then he'd go back to sleep, and he'd just sleep through the entire day. Bronchitis. So right from the name, bronchitis, we know it's going to be something to do with the bronchi. In this case, a branch of the bronchi, called the bronchioles. Remember when we branched down further and further and further, we got to the bronchioles. And what happens, it's very much like asthma, where we're going to get an inflammation of the lining of the bronchioles, which is going to cause less air to be able to pass through them. Now, it usually develops from a cold or other respiratory infection and goes away within 10 days. It's also generally due to a virus, therefore antibiotics won't be very effective. Treatments include drinking fluids, getting plenty of rest, and over-the-counter pain relievers to reduce the inflammation and ease the pain and discomfort. Lung cancer. Irregular and uncontrolled growth of tumors in the lung tissue, and we can see that in these couple pictures. So first in our x-ray, we can see a buildup of different kinds of tissues inside the lung area. And with our main picture on the top, you can see a discoloration inside the lung. All this white stuff here is not normal lung tissue. And just since we have a different structure, we're going to get a different function. And since that lung tissue won't be able to function properly, we're going to get less gas exchange. So it's one of the most common types of cancer, and 9 out of 10 cases are caused by smoking. And keep in mind, not only will you have a higher chance of getting lung cancer, but you also have a higher chance of getting other cancers, as that cancer can spread through a process called metastasis. So just to review the major structures that we talked about, air is going to travel in through the nose and mouth, past the pharynx and the larynx, into the trachea. Once it gets into the trachea, it's going to branch left and right into the bronchi. Those bronchi are going to branch further and further and further into the bronchioles. And then eventually the air is going to end up in these sacs called alveoli, where the gas exchange is going to occur. Oxygen is going to go into the capillaries, and carbon dioxide is going to travel from the capillaries into the alveoli. When we exhale, the carbon dioxide is going to be sent out of the alveoli into the bronchioles, from the bronchioles into the bronchi, into the trachea, and then out the mouth, and perhaps the nose. And that's going to relieve our body of the carbon dioxide buildup. And that concludes our lesson on the respiratory system.